Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Their stories are here to help us to understand who we are and who they are. And it's such a privilege to have Dr. Ada Mao with us this afternoon. And Ada, I've known her for a couple of years now, and she's a research assistant with a special interest in educational inequalities and social justice, STEM education. But I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to just welcome Ada and say a big thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to ask Ada to kick off with that question, which I always ask, which is, can you tell me a little bit about what it was as you were growing up, which helped to give you your sense of belonging, your sense of identity as you were growing up? Thanks.
Oh, hi, Wayne. Hi, everyone. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Apologies in advance. I've like a slight cough, so hopefully I don't burst into like coughing in the middle of me talking.
That's all right.
But yes, yeah, so I thanks very much for inviting me to be part of the Belonging. So yeah, I've been in Imperial College London for more than a year now, and a bit about my more personal experience. So fitting to the series. So yeah, I was born in Hong Kong. I lived there when I was young, and then I moved to the US, to California, in my teens. And then I partially grew up there, and then did my undergraduate studies there, and then work a little bit, and then I moved to the UK to do my postgraduate education. So here I am. It's been here for so I guess I kind of spread my life in 3 different continents.
Okay, so as you were saying, you've lived in a number of places, right? From Hong Kong to the US to the UK. So if we go back and start at the beginning, as it were, what was it like for you growing up in Hong Kong? How did you gain your sense of identity, who you were? What was it that influenced you in Hong Kong?
So when I was living in Hong Kong, it was still under the British rule. It was still British colony. And Hong Kong as a place, I think it's always been like kind of branded itself. I think itself kind of east meets west. So in a way, there's quite kind of cosmopolitan, international city. I mean, the population there is ethnic Chinese or Han Chinese majority, but you do get a lot of different people from other parts of the world there, and also influences from different parts of the world. And obviously there was a heavy British influence because they're under British rule, and of course there Chinese culture, people Chinese ethnic background, or at least Southern Chinese, but also got a lot of influence from, like, especially for example, since like the 80s and 90s, got a lot from other neighboring Asian countries, like Japanese popular culture. Right. And in more recent times, like, Korean culture, like K-pop, K-drama, those things are kind of like, kind of popular around the region. So yeah, it's actually definitely a place with like different influences from different places.
So what you're saying is that actually growing up in Hong Kong, it was like a melting pot, lots of different cultures that you were exposed to. So partly you were exposed to being a British colony, you had the British influence, but you had influences from all around, essentially, quite a number of other Asian countries, China, etc., So how did you view yourself, kind of thing? Did you view yourself as Chinese British? What did you even think about it?
I think at the time when I was living there, you know, when I was young, I think because we were just told that, oh, you're British because you know, you're in this British colony, you have this British passport, but even though it's actually a second-class British passport, I can let you know that, that it doesn't have the same rights as the British passport of, you know, people born in the UK. It's a long story, save for a different time, but then or people look it up yourself, you know. But yeah, but I mean, we're told you're British, you know, and then you have kind of different, kind of unique, kind of Hong Kong kind of identity and way of life and such, because of the different influences and such. So, and Hong Kong is a small place, so a lot of things, especially in the past, were like imported. So like, you know, from food to like cultures and things, you know. So I think that's why it kind of gave me a kind of more kind of perspective, like you know, international perspectives. I guess in some way it helps. Yeah.
Mm. So you had there was just so many. It wasn't that you thought of yourself in this way or that way. It was just that you were there. You would be, as it were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of then when you moved across to the US, how was that culturally for you? How did you have that same sense of belonging? Were you made to feel that you belonged when you were in the US? How old were you roughly when you moved across as well?
Yeah, so I was in my teens, and then yeah, so obviously that's the time you try to fit in, you know, have your sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. So it was yeah, it was an interesting transition. So it was a quite common thing for people in Hong Kong at the time in the 80s and 90s. A lot of people migrated or went abroad because of the handover from the British government to China, Chinese rule. So a lot of middle class families like moved away actually to different countries like Canada, America, Australia, and such. So it was quite, like, again, you know, common for middle class or middle class families and such. So a lot of my friends at the time was on moved, but so I moved to the US in San Francisco. That's where I lived mostly, and trying to kind of fit in. I guess because I have to admit that I had like quite kind of advantageous upbringing when I was in Hong Kong, and I got to actually yes, I mean, Hong Kong, everyone learned English, but then the level of fluency and such, you know, vary. So yeah, so I actually, you know, spoke, you know, good or fluent English by the time I was going to the US. So and then so I guess I didn't, partially because I was trying not to, but also I wasn't maybe like different from some of the other new arrival from Hong Kong or other places, because my English was better. And so and then as you know, even now, like, you know, some, you know, not speaking good English or fluently is seen as not being like fitting in and such. So yeah, so I guess that helped me to kind of like fit in. There was a particularly vivid memory of like I remember that when I was in high school. So I was in a driver's ed class. So that was this lesson in the US at the time when I was there. So I was sitting next to two girls, and they were what you call ABC, which is American born Chinese girls, and then they were just like you know, we were sitting there in class, and they were making a comment about like, oh, these Hong Kong girls are trying to dress like us and such, you know. So obviously they didn't know that I was from Hong Kong, and then, you know, they just assumed that I was also ABC, I guess, because also I adapted my accent, growing up in Hong Kong as a British English, kind of grew up with, and then moved to the US. So I kind of changed my accent to adapt to it, and then so that was like something like, so I guess obviously I somehow blended in, even though passed as an ABC, I guess, but then so I think there was definitely like the sense of belonging, like there's the wider, like Chinese American or Asian American, how it fit within the society, but then within the community, and you still get this like kind of hierarchy of like, different groups, like the new arrivals at the time it's called FOB, Fresh Off the Boat, which actually that was US TV series actually not long ago. It was on TV. It was like describing this phenomenon. So obviously I didn't want to be seen as the fresh off the boat. And somehow I guess I succeeded. But I mean, obviously like, looking back, it's like, I bought into these kind of like, ideas and internalizing, certain prejudice and things like that. But that was trying to fit in as a teenager.
So basically what you were saying, or one of the things you were saying, was about there was a movement away from Hong Kong as a result of the kind of like hand back from the British Empire to the Chinese. So there seemed to have been a movement away, a migration at that time. But when you got to the US, almost like those who were, as you called them, the ABCs, the American-born Chinese, they viewed you as being foreign. Even
right.
So you were.
Right.
Did
not me personally, since I,
because you were able to blend in, to get away with it.
Right. Yes, that was that stigma. Yep.
Now, I find that quite fascinating. That that even though you there was that cultural difference, because of the cultural frames of reference, and it's only because of your English was good at the time and is good now, that they weren't saying that you were one of those fresh off the boats. You could pass as just an ABC, as it were. Did that make your transition into the US easier, would you say?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess because then I didn't have some of the perhaps difficulties, like the language barrier. Some people might experience it more of it, and as I was in Hong Kong, I was also grew up with some like American TV shows and such. So like so some of the stuff, so there's some similar, and music as well. So I was already listening to like Western music, what you call, like US or UK pop music and such when I was young. So actually I didn't listen to as much like Hong Kong or Canton pop music as much when I was younger. So so in a way I guess it made it easier for me.
So what was it, because part of the thing which I know that you're very interested in is educational inequalities, etc., etc. Where did that kind of, going through, when you went and did your undergraduate, your degrees and things, what degree was it, and was that influenced by anything that had happened whilst through these transitional periods?
So I studied an undergraduate, it was a quite interdisciplinary degree with urban studies and planning, but also had a minor in environmental studies. So so the main degree was a combination of different issues affecting like life in urban areas, so it could be the actual planning policies, could be the environment, it could be the education policy, economics and stuff. So I think from that degree, in a way, it made a very good foundation of like the work that I, been involving, I guess, later on working in academia and the different aspects of it, like thinking about the different issues affecting different parts of the population, especially the inequalities. And I mean, I was very interested in environmental issues. I mean, I'm still am, but but that isn't my specialty anymore. But sort of like how the a lot of human actions, like the inequalities affecting different countries, unequally and such. So I think that kind of gave me the kind of foundational, I guess, getting more into working towards social justice and equity work and such.
So what was it that made you, in terms of the majors that you did in your studies, what was it that then made you come to the UK from living in the US? How long were you in the US, and was there a pull? What was the story behind that?
Yeah, so I was only actually just planning to be coming to the UK for a year to study my master's, and then I think it was in my 20s that I was just not sure what I really wanted to do. I mean, I think I had I still do. I have many interests, so I'm trying to figure out what will be the way to go. And so I think I would just I decided I want to. I got tired. And I did work a little bit after I finished my undergraduate degree, and then but then it just it wasn't something I really wanted for life, and so I decided, okay, I'll just go on to do my pursue my master's and then see what happens. And so I came to the UK and then ended up staying, and then I at the time wanted to work in the museum and heritage kind of sector. Yeah, no, slight change. But like I said, I actually have many interests in many fields like STEM, humanities, social science, actually, all very interested to me. But yeah, so at that time, that's why I wanted to be here in London, having so many different museums, galleries, or heritage sector. So I thought actually, compared to the US especially, because especially the West Coast, the comparatively, cities are quite young there. So yeah, so I just wanted to stay in London, and I really like London. So, but then but then I didn't have much luck finding a permanent or longer term job in that sector because it's very competitive and low pay, and also very unequal and kind of access also workforce wise in that sector as well. But yeah, and then somehow then I always tell people that I fell into academia because when I was job searching, that I ended up with my first academic job actually was being a researcher on an ESRC funded project. I was looking at particularly British Chinese pupils or students, young people, school students, and the participation on the Saturday schools. So usually they're particularly learning Cantonese Chinese or sometimes Mandarin Chinese at the time. So yeah, I think I was hired because, and obviously I had the skills, but also because it required someone who could speak Cantonese. So yeah, so that's kind of how I started got into academia, and then they got from there.
So from the position of going to coming to the UK, finding a job, or came to the UK to study, but then you found a job in the sector, but as you said, that the sector wasn't necessarily diverse in its recruitment processes. But then you found another research position which was looking at Chinese students going to Saturday schools. What can you remember the findings? What was the rationale behind that study? And then we'll come back to kind of thing, how you then went from there to kind of become an academic, as it were.
Yeah. So so that was particularly looking at the British Chinese community, I guess the more established communities. So as you would know, Wayne, like the Saturday school, supplementary school in this country started from like the Black supplementary school, and also other ethnic and linguistic minority groups also have like been doing different kind of weekend schools or after school learning with like sometimes heritage mother tongue language, or sometimes like with school subjects and stuff. But so that project was particularly looking at the British Chinese experiences of people, young people going to these schools, and also like the structure of these schools, and it's quite similar to for other type of kind of these heritage language or supplementary schools. Like people are, this is outside of the formal mainstream provision, and people are like often volunteers or from the community. They're trying to support their children, the younger generations that like maybe what formal education can't provide. Whether it could be a sense of belonging, like a place that you can express your Chineseness. You can talk to your friends about Chinese music or Chinese TV, or learning the like the language, whether the Cantonese Chinese or Mandarin Chinese, and also I think for the adults, they're hoping to like kind of like pass on certain like cultures and traditions for the younger generation to learn. So I think, but for young people, I think if you ask most people who attended these schools at the time when they're at the school, they would hate it. The best thing about these schools was because you're going to school on a Saturday or Sunday. Who wants that? But but then I think, like, I guess like it does create like a social space, create different types of belonging from, different maybe from in your mainstream school, especially in the past, like there were kind of more, like stigma, there's still stigma of speaking a different language other than English, but like you can like express certain things maybe more freely, in that kind of co-ethnic environment, I guess you can say. But I think a lot of people, like I also spoken to people who are like older, then they wish they actually like have got to learn more Chinese. They paid attention more at the at the Chinese school and such, but also the limitation, because these schools are often run by volunteers or teachers and not trained teachers and stuff, so like the experience could vary, like whether how much people could learn and such.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating what you were saying in terms of the fact that I know about like Saturday schools or community schools for like the African Caribbean community and for like the Muslim communities. And it seems to me that within every community, there is this aspect of we need to pass our culture on to the next generation, especially if that generation happens to be not in, if they're not in their native country, so their country of origins, as it were. So, and I really like the point which you made about the children may not necessarily like being there, because it's kind of like, well, why are we at school and everyone else isn't, and kind of thing. But later on, they may well get a better appreciation of the things which they've learned. So how then did you going and attending, doing this little research project, how then did that lead you to do further studies? What was the rationale then from there?
Yeah, so working on that project actually then kind of led me to do my PhD. I think after, kind of when that project was wrapping up, my the PIs, my supervisors were kind of encouraging. I was like, oh, do you want to keep working in research or in education research and such? And then suggested, perhaps like doing a PhD would be the way to go. There's something I didn't really think of, it was never like really a planned thing. I wanted to do a PhD, when I was younger. So I think because I had opportunity. And then, yeah, so I did a PhD and I followed actually that project I just spoke of. So my own PhD was looking at British Chinese young people, but those that, you know, who didn't really attend these Chinese schools, Chinese language schools, and maybe they don't speak much Chinese, or, you know, or even their parents don't speak much Chinese. You know, people, I guess you can say, you know, like more removed than the Chinese culture. And then I get looking at like how their experiences in education system, as well as like the wider society, how they view you know, their own like kind of Chineseness, Britishness, or how they've been, you know, kind of being viewed by others and such. Yeah, so actually perfectly fitting the theme of belonging. So yeah, how to belong in this and not navigate, you know, yeah, the world.
So what was your findings then from from your piece of research? Because I could be interviewing you based just on that research, almost, about the Chinese young people's sense of culture when they've been kind of like one step removed from being engrossed within the culture. So how did they view themselves?
Right, like, are they being seen as more integrated, you know, like, and such? They were like my questions when I was going in with it. So found, obviously, like some of you would know that British Chinese young people, school students, they're like one of the highest achieving group, I guess, in the UK education system. But they still experience a lot of prejudice and racism. It just the kind of education success, you know, or more generally overall speaking, kind of mask some of the underlying issues, and often young people experience microaggression, racism. But unfortunately, also, this is similar to other minority ethnic groups, visible minorities, that people would kind of normalize or kind of just accepted those things are just everyday life, unfortunately. So people, you know, that's a way of coping, you know, especially sometimes it's very difficult to address things like the kind of what you call low level kind of racism. Like, I guess, particularly Orientalism, I guess we would say, because that's like more specific, like on kind of Chinese children or young people. And so I think people draw their sense of belongings, like their Chineseness, Britishness, like from various ways. And then it's quite, you know, I think it's identities and belongings are very complex things. So I'm sure listeners of this series will have found about that. So yeah, and yeah, it's very so different. Yeah, different people draw different things, but I think it's the young people, you know, definitely can, you know, have their sense of like belonging, identities and stuff. But I think it's like often externally they're being put in the box, like people have certain essentialized ideas as like what Chineseness is, you know, what Britishness is, you know, and then so sometimes people would internalize those things, or they get told like, oh, you don't speak good Chinese, so you're not Chinese enough, you know, like that kind of thing. Or young people will get, you know, ask about by non-Chinese people, you know, like to kind of perform their Chineseness, to kind of on demand, you know, like asking them about, you know, how do you say something in Chinese, you know, when you know they might not speak Chinese, you know, like, so yeah, so I think it's, but so those, it's quite complex. It's like those kind of expectations are both from non-Chinese people, but also within the, I guess, the wider Chinese community themselves as well.
I think that really, I think it's so fascinating that idea of them having this Chineseness, Britishness, how the two marry up together, the microaggressions, the normalizing of behaviors, and I like the word, the Orientalism, which they suffer, as it were. I wanted to just kind of like compare and contrast that to the experiences. Do you think that those who had gone to the Saturday schools, who had a kind, would you say that they had a stronger sense of their cultural identity from a Chinese perspective compared to those in your study, which the people in your study who hadn't necessarily attended those? And do you think that in itself may have given them more resilience, if that's the right word that we're looking for?
It's difficult to say, actually. I guess maybe for some, I think, because like I said, the experience it could be so mixed, you know, like, so some people, you know, like maybe some young people, they do appreciate like the Chinese space, and, you know, like I think especially more in the past where, you know, like there's more kind of separation of, you know, your mainstream school self and then your kind of Chinese self and such. But yeah, so I mean, I'm actually interested in how it might been like, it's been actually since obviously the research I've done, you know, especially with the last few years, the pandemic, with the kind of rise of unfortunately the rise of anti-Asian hate. I mean, obviously, I mean, that's been reported quite a bit, like what happened in America, but even in the UK, and that's been there was still some like incidents of people like getting, well, I mean, there's incident of people actually getting physically attacked, but also there've been lots of reports of people just experiencing that, you know, the microaggression, and became kind of okay to be like overtly, you know, kind of having these kind of racist attack on like Chinese, or people who just look like they're Chinese, you know, like they're not even necessarily Chinese, but people who like they just assume to be Chinese or East Asian or Southeast Asian. So yeah, but yeah, so I think that actually would have quite different perspective, you know, maybe on people, young people now.
Yeah, it would be interesting to follow up on your study to see what the perception is now, following all of the situations that has happened in the past couple of years. So tell me, in terms of your sense of belonging and your sense of identity, how has that changed, would you say, when you've had to be in these different, from when you were in Hong Kong compared to when you were in the US, and now that you're here in the UK, how has your sense of who you are changed in that time?
Yes, that's a good question. I think when I was in Hong Kong, I was young. I didn't really think too much of it because I was the majority, and also kind of young, not really thinking about those things too much. And like I said, when I was in the US, you know, I was like trying to fit in, and I guess in a way trying to like reject part of my identity. Like I was explaining, you know, with like trying to fit in, to not seen as like fresh off the boat, and trying to blend in, because yeah, that's like yeah. But then, so I think at that time probably rejecting, yeah, certain aspects of my kind of Chinese, you know, kind of background, identities and such. But then later on, I think in the UK, I think it's funny. I don't think I really thought about like these kind of things as much, especially my Chinese identity, as much, you know, until I actually worked on that Chinese school project, because like that made myself kind of reflect on how I think about those things myself, and then kind of come to terms with those things more. I think it's sort of like when you're getting older, you might kind of accept yourselves, you know, like more with certain aspects of yourself. So yeah, definitely I think it was from working with yeah, on those topics that actually made me kind of think more about how I belong. And in a way, I think it's like if people ask me, you know, like, where you from, who are you, or whatever, I don't know. And yeah, I think it depends on who is asking, I guess, you know. And I think it's interesting, I guess, in London, because so many people like from everywhere, you know, So I think, yeah, sometimes it depends on where, sometimes I know, we're all aware of the question of where you're really from.
Mhm.
So I have to say, that interestingly, that often from my experience in London, it often come from like non-white people and other like kind of people of migrant background or heritage, because I think maybe they think, oh yeah, we're all from somewhere, so so where are you really from? Like then that obviously I understand the problem with this question and the and such, but yeah, it's interesting. I think from my experience, actually, it comes from other people, from other migrant background as well. So yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm not sure if anyone from the audience has any questions which they'd like to ask, but we've got one from William's raised his hand. So I'm going to ask William, can you ask your question to Ada, please? Ada, please.
Yeah, hi Ada. Yeah, thank you for your thoughts today. Yeah, so mine was just like to broaden out from your personal experience and to that comparison between the Chinese diaspora in the US and then the Chinese in the UK. Would you say, are their experiences similar, or do the Chinese diaspora in the US, I don't know, do they have better outcomes in life than say than the Chinese diaspora in the UK?
Thanks, William, for the question and also attending this session. Yeah, there's similarities, but also quite different, because in the US, if you say Asian or Asian American, then that includes, although it includes kind of all the Asian countries, but often people think of East Asian and particularly Chinese. And also because of the population, the migration history is different, the US and the UK. So there are a lot more like Chinese or East Asian or Southeast Asian kind of background communities in the US. So it's like, I guess you get the critical mass. So that's why you get, I guess you, in a way, you get a louder voice, in some ways, even though obviously it's still not that loud, in some ways, like some of the issues affecting the communities are still not being, kind of addressed, even though, with the whole anti-Asian hate thing brought a lot of these issues, to the surface, but lots still could be done. But in the UK, because, normally, historically, when you say Asian, it's just, they mean South Asian, like from, so like, it historically actually doesn't really include Chinese or other East Asian countries. Like funny, like just, yeah, the term, it's, kind of have like kind of different kind of connotations. So I think even so yeah, Chinese are always like a quite small kind of population. So I think it affects like a lot of times, if you have data, like if like for example for health or education, because the numbers are so small, then it's kind of difficult sometimes to kind of gather the evidence to show, like the actual picture, and sometimes or you can't even find the evidence because the numbers are too low. And in the UK particularly, the population, the settlement, because especially a lot of people came in the post-war era, they came and then had like set up different like Chinese takeaways and restaurants, and so they're scattered around the country. And because to kind of avoid competitions, you don't want all these Chinese people to gather in this one small town, like, so people disperse. So I think it also affect like how people could come together, especially before like the internet and the social media and stuff. So I think made the people like more isolated. So I think, yeah, it's different. But I think the whole what happened the last couple of years have galvanized actually more kind of a whole more kind of, I guess you can call it kind of more pan-ethnic, like East, Southeast Asian kind of like identity. Although I don't think that's really been understood in the mainstream just yet, but like within like East and Southeast Asian communities, like, so there's this term like ESEA, that kind of like people gather together, because there's some commonalities, but also obviously there are differences amongst the different population groups. They face different issues and such. But yeah, so I think that's like something good come out of, you know, all the kind of tragedy and difficulties.
So thank you for that question, William. Really good. So the outcomes are largely down to the attitudes of the inherent country where they've migrated to. That seems to influence it quite a bit. Yeah. So Ida, I'm going to ask probably one of my final questions for today. A couple of questions really. Since you well, this weekend is kind of like the lunar New Year, right? And you will have celebrated it in the US, in Hong Kong, and in the UK. Which one has been the best?
Well, it's an interesting question, because yeah, so I guess we're talking about Lunar New Year. So for me, particularly, it's Chinese New Year. Yeah. And yeah, so but I guess the experience is quite different. And actually, you know, as we know that actually, although I know we talked about how we want to preserve cultures or pass down cultures to younger generations, culture itself, you know, it does evolve, you know, it's static, you know, like, so things have changed, you know, since, you know, when I was very young in Hong Kong compared to now if I go to Hong Kong, you know, or in the US. Like, for example, when I was in the US and in San Francisco, on Chinese New Year Day, because the high Chinese population or East Asian population in San Francisco Bay Area, so often like some of the children would just miss class that day because, you know, they go celebrate. And then so now actually it's now like a public holiday on that school, like a school holiday, you know, like because there's so many people, you know, there would celebrate it. So, you know, so I think so that even the experience of like have changed. So yeah, I think it's different. I think it's different. And even in London, I think in the past, I mean, yeah, if you go to Chinatown, it was, I mean, before COVID, obviously, yeah, you get like quite a big crowd. It's quite interesting. And then, because and also in the last couple of years, a lot of people from Hong Kong have migrated to the UK. So actually now we've got a lot more like the Hong Kong kind of Chinese New Year things from that I didn't get, you know, like in the past. So yeah, I think it's different. I think that they're all kind of different and also have changed over time as well.
That's a very diplomatic answer, right? I asked for which one was best, and you kind of like went round and said, "Well, that was a good bits here, good bits there." I love the answer. So looking back, kind of thing. My final kind of question for you today is kind of like, if you was to look back and think to yourself, what advice would you have given your younger self about the experiences that you were going to be encountering and how they would cope with the experiences that life would give? So what kind of advice would you give them?
Advice to my younger self. It's difficult. In a way, I guess just maybe pay more attention in class, I have to say. I know, despite, you know, the stereotype of, you know, like hardworking Chinese students, so I don't think I was a very good student in some ways. I mean, obviously you might not think that because, you know, I have a PhD and stuff, but no, I think it just like embrace more like the different opportunities. That, you know, I think, like I said, I think I've been blessed with like lots of, you know, opportunities and good opportunities. And then that's why, not underplaying what my, you know, my own personal achievement, the hard work, but, you know, I think because of you know, the opportunities I had, you know, that's enabled me to do things I do now, or things I've done. So, you know, compared to like other people who don't have the access to those opportunities. So to links to actually my current role at Imperial, which works in the outreach department, trying to support young people who might have, you know, like less access to some of these opportunities. Yeah, I guess to my younger self also be more understanding of other people. Yeah, I think it's like I wasn't aware of like all the good opportunities, the privileges and such when I was younger. So yeah, that I guess.
Seize the opportunities, be open to new ideas and experiences. Ada, thank you so much. Yeah, you've been a wonderful guest and taught us so much today about the experiences of individuals from the Chinese diaspora and your own travels, your transitions. I think that's really been really fascinating. And so I really want to say a big thank you for sharing your experience with us today on Belonging. So I'm going to just mention what's happening for next week. And next week, we're going to have Dr. Linda Ince Greenaway, sorry. And she's a leadership coach at Connecting Life Coaching. She's so much more. She's got she's an author, entrepreneur. She's got such a really powerful story. So please come and listen to her story and join in with us next week in the discussion. If you have missed any of the other 100 or so episodes or editions of Belonging, then please go to our YouTube channel where you can catch up and hear about the different stories of belonging. I'd like to also say it's going to be, as I always say, none of these things would have happened if people weren't so willing to share their experiences. And so over the weekend, talk to someone who you may not have spoken to before, find out a little bit more and help everyone to have that sense of identity and sense of belonging. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you again next week.